Awesome. Thank you so much, Kirsty, for those introductions and also for organizing this series of webinars. I know you'll be deeply missed, and yeah, I'm excited that we'll still be seeing you around at future sessions wearing your coaching hat. So thank you everyone for joining today's Podium Performance webinar. Like Kirsty said, today we're going to be talking about mental health and well-being of community sport coaches. So this webinar first came about as an opportunity to share the results of a research study that we did on this topic earlier this year. But even more importantly, it's a chance to discuss a topic that can so often be overlooked in sport. Coaching is a dynamic and challenging role, which is something I don't need to describe to all of you on this call. And while we're seeing more discussions around mental health in sport, they're usually focused on athletes. So what about coaches? Your mental health and well-being impacts your daily functioning, but it also impacts your coaching practice and it impacts the athletes that you work with. So taking steps to care for your own mental health and well-being has a positive impact on not only you and your life, but on your coaching. And in this role, you have an opportunity to act as a role model for your athletes. So today we invite you to engage in some reflection, some discussion. We hope that you'll use the chat, and hopefully this presentation leaves you with some practical applications that you can use in your own coaching practice. So before we dive too much into the details, we'll start with some introductions. And maybe if there's anything, Matt and Lori, you wanted to add to what Kirsty said, we can hop through that. And I'll invite everyone else, if you're comfortable sharing, to share your sport and where you're joining us from today in the chat. Yeah, so I think, Kirsty, you pretty much covered it for me. I'm a grad student in sports psych at Dal right now. I do run ultra marathons in most of my spare time. And I'm really interested in the kinds of things that influence how we perform and how we do our best, both in sport and in life as athletes and coaches. A fun fact, I'm originally from Newfoundland, and I grew up as an athlete and later a coach in swimming and in artistic swimming. And I got to know most provinces of Atlantic Canada when I was younger through their pools. So I knew like the Dalplex before I'd really seen anywhere else in Halifax. I knew the Aqua Arena in St. John's, the UNB pool, and I sort of expanded my understanding of those cities outwards. Matt, I'll throw it over to you.
Yeah, sure. Not a ton to add from Kirsty's brief introduction, but just, I guess, give a little bit more background about myself. Originally from Ontario, prior to moving to Acadia in 2019, worked at university in the United States for about 3 years. So learned a lot about the sporting system on that side of the border as well. And more recently have started volunteering as a community coach myself in terms of kind of navigating that parent coach volunteer role. Just came from basketball practice tonight from my son's U10 team. So all of these sorts of topics are certainly front of mind, and excited to learn and chat with all of you this evening.
Hi, everyone. Like Kirsty said, my name is Lori Dithurbide. I've had the opportunity to do a few of these podium sessions in the past, so great to be back and to be involved with this. I have the pleasure of being Kelsey's supervisor at Dalhousie University and have been teaching there for a few years. I'm originally from Shuddy Camp on Cape Breton Island. Grew up there. My family is still there. In addition to my work as a faculty member, I also work as a mental performance consultant with a variety of level of competition, mostly now focusing with a couple of national teams. And also have some experience coaching. So I have coach certifications in hockey, as well as a certified competition coach in curling. So thanks again. And my role tonight, or part of my role, is to man the chat. So if anybody has any questions at any point in time, or if Kelsey's asking for any questions, or you feel free to answer, feel free to jot that in the chat, and I will be moderating that. And thanks everybody for putting in their introductions in the chat so far. It's great to know who's here. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt and Lori. And yeah, it's so exciting to see where everyone's joining from tonight. Keep using that chat if you have questions or ideas that are sparked throughout the presentation. Like Lori said, she and Matt will be moderating the chat, and they might also chime in if they have other things to add throughout the presentation. So thank you, everyone. So we wanted to start today by talking about what is mental health. And I'd like you to throw in that chat again, if you're comfortable, what mental health means to you. What are words that come to mind? Do you have a definition of that for yourself? Yeah, what does mental health mean to you? Self-care, yeah. And maybe you're still warming up tonight. Like if this was a practice, maybe this is just your warm-up reflection question. So if you're thinking about that and you don't want to put it in the chat, that's a-okay too. But it's a chance to think about and reflect on what that means. Taking care of yourself, be the best that you can be. Yeah, definitely. Confidence to act and work in a healthy manner. Yeah. Yeah, and so that last one actually, Roz touches on a couple of the pieces included in the World Health Organization's definition. So the WHO defines mental health as a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, to realize their abilities, to learn well and work well, and to contribute to their community. It's an integral component to health and well-being that underpins our individual and collective abilities to make decisions, build relationships, and shape the world that we live in. And I think that you summed it up really well as being able to live and work and realize our full potential. So there's a lot of pieces reflected in here. Kimberly, taking care of yourself, however that may look individually, so you can show up for the rest of the day. Absolutely. So mental health impacts all of us. We all have mental health, just like we have physical health. And that includes things related to our mental, our psychological, and our social well-being. And mental health doesn't only influence all of our physical health, it also influences how we think, feel, and act. When we think about mental health too, it's important to make a distinction between mental health and mental illness. So mental health is more than just the absence of mental illness. It exists on a complex continuum. And we actually like to put these on two different continuums. So even though they're related concepts, mental health and mental illness are not the same. So if we look at that sort of lime green line horizontal on this axis, that represents mental illness. So you might have no symptoms of mental illness or a mental health condition, or you might have a number of symptoms of a mental health condition or a diagnosis of mental illness. Now, related to it, but existing on a different continuum, is mental health. So that's that blue vertical line in the middle here. And so similarly, it exists on a continuum. You might have positive mental health, or you might have poor mental health. And the important distinction here is that it's possible to live with a mental illness, so have all of those symptoms, but still have positive mental health. So existing in that top right quadrant. It's also possible to have poor mental health, but have no mental illness. So you might fall sort of lower on that bottom left quadrant. So in other words, neither of these are binary. You don't just have mental health or not. There's a range of experiences and a range of symptoms that fall in both of those continuums. So what are some signs that you might be experiencing positive mental health if you found yourself in that top end? You can throw them in the chat if you have any ideas. I'll just name a couple to start with. So you might be sleeping well, you might be eating normally, you might feel more social, high performance in your work or in your hobbies. You might generally feel more calm. So those are a few signs that you're existing in that positive mental health. continuum. Now, you might also want to keep an eye out for warning signs that you might be experiencing poor mental health. So if you were falling in that bottom half of the continuum, you might be feeling more anxious, have trouble sleeping at night, be exhausted or tired, and that would affect your performance in work and life, or you might not be showing up. So noticing a lot of absenteeism is something that you'd look for here too. So what influences mental health? What sort of factors make a difference in terms of where we fall in that continuum? So there's just a few named here, but really there's a wide range of factors, and they can have both positive and negative influences on our mental health. So when you think of the kinds of things that exist in your role as a coach, there might be a number of these individual, social, and environmental factors that have a part to play in your mental health and well-being. So for example, the relationship that you have with other coaches could be a positive influence because they're a source of support. They're a helpful ear or someone that you can delegate tasks to relieve some of the stress that you're feeling. Maybe that camaraderie helps you to feel more well and experience positive mental health. Similarly, social relationships could at times be a source of stress. Maybe you're experiencing some conflict or some difficulty with another colleague in your sport or in your club. So it's really complex and varied, and really just to say there's a ton of influences that are within your control and are sometimes out of your control that have to do with your mental health. So when we talk about mental health in sport, most of the conversations, the existing research and resources focus on athlete mental health. So it makes sense because mental health and well-being has such an impact on physical health and performance. It's great that it's becoming a greater focus, and we're starting to understand how to support and recognize athlete mental health in sport. But what about coach mental health? A lot of the research in and around coach mental health has springboarded off of an understanding that athlete mental health can be influenced by coach mental health. So those two are related, but really coaches are people and performers in your own right. So like we talked about earlier, there are a number of aspects of the coaching role that have an influence on your mental health and well-being. And so it's important to consider that, not just because of the influence on athletes, but because you are a whole and important person too. So when we started to look at the research and the resources out there, we noticed that a lot of the new research and the start of investigating coach mental health was on high performance and in elite sport. But there are some nuanced differences in the environment and the kinds of athletes that coaches work with and the roles for sport coaches in elite versus community sport. So all of this led us to the current research study that we're sharing with you today. And it laid the foundation for the study that our team completed earlier this year. So we were really interested in developing a deeper understanding of the factors that impact the mental health and well-being of community sport coaches in Atlantic Canada. We were exploring the stressors, the coping strategies, and the resources related to their role as a coach. So in this research, we had two key objectives: to better understand the stressors, coping strategies, and mental health of community sport coaches, to explore coaches' perceptions regarding how their well-being could be better supported by sport organizations. Earlier this year, we interviewed 19 coaches about their experiences related to this topic. We recruited individuals from across Atlantic Canada and from a variety of sport backgrounds. So here's a little bit of an overview of who took part. You can see there were 14 different sports. Some people actually were coaching in multiple sports. A variety of coaching experience, from brand new to coaching to 5 people who've been coaching for over 20 years. And we tried to get that range of experiences from across Atlantic Canada too, knowing that the context of the geography that you're in also plays a part in your experience as a coach. So from these interviews, we transcribed the conversations, and then we grouped a few of the key discussion points together in order to generate a set of themes. So that's what you see here. We have 3 main overarching themes with 2 or 3 sub-themes represented below. So I'll summarize each of these in the following slides, but if you're interested, we can come back to this slide later. So the first theme that came out of the research really provides important context for understanding coach mental health in sport. And a lot of the coaches spoke about this mental health culture in sport as something that they've noticed a shift in over the recent years. So a lot of coaches spoke about how it was going in a good direction. A lot more people are openly discussing mental health. It's a topic they're able to access more education on, particularly around athlete mental health. But that it does take time to change culture and for that to shift. So particularly between generations of coaches, sometimes that was a tension, or it's something that they're noticing takes a little bit more active effort or work to have those conversations. But yeah, that first sub-theme within this was coaches talking about a shift in mental health culture in sport. The second sub-theme within this was that coaches spoke about their role in supporting athlete mental health. So particularly in community sport, working with kids or adolescents, the age was a piece that they acknowledged is relevant here, because it is an age where young people are starting to experience potential challenges or mental health issues, and that coaches were noticing these things and feeling like it was a part of their role, but not necessarily equipped to recognize or deal with mental health issues, and really feeling like supporting the whole athlete was a responsibility that they had, and that it's something they'd like more education on.
Kelsey, I don't know if you are advancing your slides, but it's not showing up on the screen that you're advancing the slides.
Oh, what slide do you see?
Just the theme one.
Oh, yeah, okay. We're still in theme 1, but it's the second sub-theme.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
That's the one it should be on.
Perfect.
Good. That's always a good thing to know. Yeah, and then the third and final sub-theme on this point was that coaches identified that there was a lack of focus specifically on coach mental health. So similarly to what we were talking about earlier, coaches discussed that there was a significant gap in discussing specifically coach mental health, and that they felt it was an area that was often overlooked, or the focus on mental health in sport was really zoomed in on athlete mental health and the role that coaches had in supporting their athletes. So I'm curious, and this is an opportunity for you to share in the chat if you're comfortable, if any of these themes resonate with you and if they resonate with your experiences. Is there a particular sub-theme that stands out that you have experience with, or have an example you'd like to share? Oh yes, we also have the unmute feature. If anyone would prefer to unmute rather than share it in the chat, we can do that too.
We had one comment here saying there's definitely a lack of focus on coach mental health in a particular sport of athletics. Yeah, and Roz kind of seems to be agreeing. There's much more attention on the athlete and not so much on the coaches, which is pretty consistent with what we've been finding, not just from our participants, but also from the literature as well. Ryan says here, agreement regarding improvement for the sub-theme 1 over the past few years. A lot of people are willing to discuss it, which is good. And also agree with the lack of focus on mental health. Ben mentions that he feels a personal onus to support athlete mental health, that it's part of the role, but doesn't necessarily get that messaging from kind of above the organizational side, more of a personal choice or feeling. Yeah, I agree with you, Kimberly, who says I'm happy to see these common themes and agree more that can and should be learned. It's as a coach, it's I'm sure validating to kind of see that you're not alone in this, and that a lot of people are kind of sharing your thoughts and your feelings and are in agreement with you for sure. Yeah. Amanda says, COVID made us focus about the issues around mental health of our athletes, which then spilled over to the coaches' mental health as well. Yeah, I think COVID definitely put a spotlight on things. And I know I'll from my own experience as a mental performance consultant, not just focusing on mental health of athletes because of COVID, but all of a sudden there was a realization that this should be a priority, mental skills, mental performance skills, and mental health. And happily, all of a sudden, things got a lot busier and got a lot more requests. And I think the acknowledgement of and validation of that kind of part of performance was really important. Kirsty agrees with all. Something that she's noticed from speaking to coaches and being a coach is that we often give our athletes recovery time. And we probably preach recovery time, and it's important to take some time to rest. But as to what Kirsty says here, maybe we don't practice what we preach as well as maybe we should. The coaches rarely take breaks. Thanks, everybody, for sharing. This was really good. Thank you.
Yeah, this is one thing we were really hoping this research study and this presentation would spark, is an opportunity to share and to connect and keep the conversation going around this topic, and hopefully address some of those gaps. So if we're not talking about coach mental health and that's what people are experiencing, then let's start talking about it and putting it out in the open and sharing and seeing if we can make some of those changes, hopefully to continue to shift in a good direction.
There's a bit of an irony here too, and I've found this in doing some of the coaching education, the NCCP modules, is that, you know, really great coaches will always put their athletes first, which is great. It's a reflection of being a really great coach. But then, you know, back to Kirsty's point, is that you kind of take care of the others, and might not do the same for yourself, both in mental health, but also in other parts of performance as well, whether it be mental performance or just general self-care.
Awesome. Well, we'll hopefully have more time to keep this discussion and questions going at the end. If you have more reflections, keep adding them to the chat. This is great. Thank you so much for sharing and being here today. Also, if you're a person who takes in this information and reflects on it and isn't comfortable sharing in the chat, know that we also appreciate you being here too. So I'll move on to the next theme that we found in our research, which talked about some of the influences on coach mental health. And really, this theme encompassed a whole lot. Coaches talked about a variety of ways that their role influenced their mental health, and we grouped those into these 3 sub-themes. So the first one was talking about some of the positive influences on their mental health. And this was so many coaches mentioned the joy that they get from being a coach and from seeing their athletes succeed, and really just how the work was rewarding and gave them opportunities for social engagement, for structure, for routine in their lives. And so all of those things were really positive and helped to boost their mental health. On the flip side, they also experienced some different negative impacts based on their role or from their role. So some of those included interpersonal stressors, so things like conflict between parents or other coaches or the administrative organization of the club. Sometimes they experienced organizational stressors, so things related to scheduling or having to do a lot of administrative duties on top of their role as a coach, including, and on top of that, having personal stressors that were related to their role. So, you know, a lot of community coaches, particularly in Atlantic Canada, are volunteers. So on top of having a full-time job, you're going and juggling a busy work schedule with evening practices and weekends and trips for competitions. And on top of that, a number of coaches in this study were also parents, which I think is something we see across the board in community sports. So maybe your kid is also in your soccer team that you're coaching or participating in another sport entirely. So there's a lot of potentially stressful things that that coaches were working through. But I think this really interesting last point and sub-theme was that a lot of coaches identified in this study, at least, that there were a number of positive aspects of their role that outweighed or balanced those potentially negative stressors. So those positive pieces really gave them a buffer or an opportunity to focus on something that they loved that was a great positive influence in their life. So similarly, if you're comfortable sharing, would you be able to talk about whether any of these themes resonate with you? So if you're comfortable, share in the chat how you think coaching impacts your mental health and well-being. Is there anything from this theme that really resonates with you?
Kimberly mentions that she totally agrees. The good outweighs the bad, which keeps her trucking along. Natasha mentions that it's positive in the moment coaching community sport, but the scheduling and some admin requirements on the run up to it sometimes are really tough. And Roz says we struggle and celebrate right along with the athletes. Absolutely. And Ryan mentions coaching is mostly a positive impact, even when it's stressful, probably due to the positive impact that you have on others, in kind of having that reward, and that kind of aligns with some of the stuff we know with kind of fulfillment from volunteering. Alana says, with Special Olympics, it's often one sport-specific coach and then volunteers who help, so the coach cannot take a practice off unless they cancel practice, which we don't like to do. We love our athletes too much to disappoint them. Absolutely. And Jennifer says, the good outweighs the bad for sure. Seeing the athletes is worth it. Thank you all for sharing. Seems like we have a pretty good trend here of like, yeah, it can be super stressful, and some of the kind of stuff that's around the coaching, maybe not so much the actual interactions and the coaching itself. The stuff around the coaching seems to be stressful, but once you're in it, you're definitely gaining some benefit there. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks everyone, and thanks Lori. I definitely agree with that, and it's nice to see that that's similar for a lot of people. I'm sure the specifics of everyone's experience is varied, but to see that some of these themes are resonating is really great. We'll move on to the third and final theme that came out of these interviews, which really was focused on the coping strategies and the supports that coaches might use to influence and support their coaching practice. So the first piece was around coping strategies, which is really a term that we use to think about how we deal with stressors, either after they've happened or to potentially mitigate them from happening before they get too stressful. And within that, coaches talked about sort of three main different types of strategies. So problem-solving strategies, things like preparing in advance for a practice so it wasn't so stressful, creating communication strategies to sort of deal with some of those potentially stressful interactions with parents, and laying everything out sort of at the beginning of a season so that they had a plan in place. Yeah, so those are a couple of things that coaches mentioned related to sort of solving the problem either before or after. The next piece was around social supports as a coping strategy. So a lot of coaches talked about the importance of having someone to vent with or debrief after a really stressful situation. So whether that was another coach or whether it was a structured debrief, or having a family member or friend that they could go to after the fact to sort of share their emotions and their feelings and also work through the problem with, and that was a really helpful practice for them. Other coaches talked about the role of the coaching team and how helpful it was to have the ability to delegate certain tasks to either other coaches or members of the club. So for example, sharing administrative duties with volunteers on a board was helpful for some coaches. And then the final strategy was related to self-care. So I know that term came up at the very beginning, and self-care can look like a lot of different things. And so we saw a lot of variety of tools that they used, which could be categorized as self-care. So things like making sure you're getting enough sleep, eating well, meditating. A lot of coaches play sport as an opportunity to sort of practice self-care. And all of those things help them stay healthy and well. And then the second half of this theme had to do with training and resources. So coaches have access to a range of existing training and resources to support their coaching practice and also to support their mental health and well-being. But they did note that there's really no specific resources that they were aware of focused on coach mental health. So some coaches mentioned sort of general tools and mental health resources that they knew about sort of nationwide or not sport specific. Others mentioned some sport specific tools related to athlete mental health that they found helpful for incorporating into their own practice. And others mentioned that some of the general resources and training around coaching supported their practice and sort of helped to reduce some of those stresses involved in just like the coaching aspects of their role. They did share that there are some barriers to accessing resources, so not being aware of them, finding the format difficult, or not having enough time to take them on. So when we really summed up this sub-theme, we looked at how coaches suggested a variety of resources that they'd like to see, and that main focus in developing new resources should really focus on the form. So having accessible resources that are either in small groups, focused in peer support, mentorship, or online, so that they are easily accessible to coaches, and that the content is really important too. So specifically, coach mental health is a topic they'd like to see addressed, but also those things that deal with some of those stressors around coaching that we were just talking about. So, managing some of the administrative side of things, management training, conflict training, and that all of those play a role in their mental health as well. So we actually have a few of those resources here that we wanted to share with you. And Kirsty, I think, are you able to send the slides after? We can share these around if you're able to, so that folks have access to these. I think we'll be able to do that.
Yeah, sorry, I'm nodding, but yes.
Yeah,
sure.
okay, cool. All right, so we'll send these along after. And if you know of others, feel free to share them in the chat. I know there are a huge number of resources out there, particularly some of the links like on the left side of the slide here are really mental health focused resources. And some of those are sports specific, but others are like Crisis Services Canada is a number to have on hand if you're really experiencing a mental health crisis. And then, whoops, these two on the right, I'll just plug, particularly on the professional development side of things. There's a new NCCP training module that some coaches talked about that was quite helpful. The mental health and sport training, and it's free and it's accessible to coaches online. Yes, Lori in the chat. Most Atlantic provinces have a hotline. In Nova Scotia, it's 211. Yep.
And these are not crisis lines, but they are, you know, a quick phone call if you're looking for particular support. The people who are on the other end can point you in the right direction. Also had a comment from Kimberly when you're going over those themes. The debrief with the fellow coaches is particularly helpful. I think that kind of to help support that idea of validation and peer support is really helpful. There's something really comforting knowing that other people have experienced something similar, and kind of can empathize with what you're dealing with.
So to end this off, we had a couple of reflection questions and sort of things to take away from this. And we've touched really on the first one a little bit throughout. But for these three questions, if you can take a minute to reflect on your own coaching role and either jot it down for yourself or put it in the chat if you're comfortable, and answer these questions, I hope that it can give you a little bit of an awareness and pathway forward with some tangible actions to take away from this presentation. So the first question is, how does your role as a coach influence your mental health and overall well-being? And it's been really great to see some of the discussion around that throughout the chat. So I encourage you to keep doing that. Invite you to keep doing that reflection over the course of the season. The second piece is a little bit of building awareness about what can you do if you feel stressed or if you experience any sort of symptoms of burnout or poor mental health. So have some of those resources on hand and have a plan and just think about what you do if you notice any of those warning signs. And then the third question is, how can your team or club foster positive mental health throughout the year? So based on some of the discussion and learning that you've done today, is there anything that you think you're doing or that you can do to encourage positive mental health in your team? And I know we have a little time for questions and discussion, so I might just leave those in the air for you to reflect on. And we can come back to them if we'd like to talk about any of them further. But I do want to make sure we have time to sort of share and answer any questions that have come up throughout. So I'll leave these with you as questions to reflect on and think about over the next little while. And the main takeaway we want you to leave here with is that you can take some action. And that your mental health and well-being is important. You as a coach have so much of an influence on the environment that you create for your athletes and your coaches, and your mental health matters too. So sort of like that age-old piece related to flying on an airplane with a parent and a kid. Like, it's important to look after yourself and put your own oxygen mask on first so that you can help the others around you too. And finally, I'll just plug that we do have a survey as a follow-up to sort of expand on this first study, and that you are welcome to take it. Some of you may already have seen it. It was shared through the CSI Atlantic in the last little while. But it should take less than 25 minutes. It'll help to keep this conversation going. And you could win one of $300 gift cards. So, you know, hopefully there's a few things that are helpful for you in there. And yeah, we'd really love to hear from anyone on this call or any other coaches that you think would be interested in participating. It is open just to coaches in Atlantic Canada. And that brings us to the end. Lori, I see you unmuted there. Anything to add?
Just mentioning that the survey link is now in the chat.
Woohoo!
So if you do have some time, please feel free to do it. And as Kelsey said, if you know anybody that would also be interested in a chance of winning $100, and are a coach in Atlantic Canada, feel free to share. This kind of just furthers our knowledge. I do also want to kind of acknowledge a couple of people who have or a couple comments here in the chat. You know, thanks Kimberly for mentioning this. Coaching actually helps me have a balance in my life. Thanks, Ben, for the plug there too. Keeps you active, which is essential. You know, it kind of keeps you busy, it keeps you active, keeps your brain active, and has this kind of fulfillment which definitely can positively impact your mental health for sure. So thanks for sharing that.
And I've just left those reflection questions up if there's anything that prompts for you. But yeah, if you have any questions, either now or that you want to follow up with, I did include our emails in the last slide, and we're happy to take any questions now or later. Or if you have any reflections or thoughts from the presentation and want to share, we'll also invite that too.